Sunday mornings used to mean hope. Fresh coffee, Emma in her favorite dress, the drive through quiet streets with church bells echoing in the distance. I thought we'd found a place where we belonged, a community that would see past the differences and embrace the beautiful, brilliant child my daughter is. I was wrong. The morning they mocked my autistic daughter at church, I didn't scream. I didn't cause a scene. I simply took her hand and walked out while she asked me in that small, breaking voice why they didn't like her. 3 weeks later, she did something that left every single one of them speechless, and I've never been more proud. Emma came into my world 7 years ago, not through biology, but through choice. I was 28, single, working as a legal assistant, living a predictable life in a small apartment with beige walls and no real direction. Then I met her at a foster care meet-and-greet event I almost didn't attend. She was 3 years old, sitting alone in the corner of a noisy room full of potential parents and chattering children, stacking blocks in perfect symmetrical patterns. While other kids played tag or fought over toys, Emma built towers with mathematical precision, her little tongue poking out in concentration. When a volunteer accidentally knocked over her creation, Emma didn't cry or throw a tantrum. She just started over, exact same pattern, like she was following a blueprint only she could see. Something in my chest cracked open. 6 months later, she was mine. The autism diagnosis came shortly after the adoption was finalized. I'd already noticed things that the social workers glossed over. Emma didn't respond to her name consistently. She avoided eye contact, especially with strangers. Loud noises sent her into meltdowns that could last hours. She'd line up her toys instead of playing with them, and she repeated phrases from her favorite cartoon with perfect inflection, but struggled to tell me when she was hungry or hurt. The developmental pediatrician was kind but clinical. Autism spectrum disorder, she said. Moderate support needs. She handed me a folder thick with resources, therapy recommendations, and information about early intervention. I sat in my car in the parking lot for 20 minutes, staring at that folder, feeling the weight of a future I hadn't prepared for. The early years were brutal in ways I couldn't have imagined. Occupational therapy 3 times a week, speech therapy twice a week, applied behavior analysis sessions that cost more than my rent. I worked full-time at first, dropping Emma at daycare centers that called me constantly because she was too disruptive, too difficult, too different. I'd rush from the office, sweating and apologizing, to find Emma in a corner, rocking and crying, while caregivers looked at me with barely concealed frustration. After the 4th daycare asked us to leave, I made the decision that changed everything. I quit my job, took a part-time remote position that paid a fraction of my old salary, and became Emma's full-time advocate, therapist, and world. We lived on savings, then student loan deferments, then credit cards. Our apartment became a sensory-friendly zone. I removed overhead lights and bought soft lamps. I replaced scratchy furniture with soft textures Emma could tolerate. I learned to cook the 5 foods she would eat without gagging, learned to recognize the early signs of a meltdown before it peaked, learned to communicate in the language she understood, concrete, visual, patient. And slowly, painfully slowly, Emma started to emerge. She began using words to request things instead of just screaming. She tolerated the grocery store if we went at 7 in the morning when it was empty. She learned to dress herself, though it took 45 minutes and the clothes had to be tagless and worn in soft. Every tiny victory felt monumental, because I knew the work behind it. But Emma wasn't just challenges and therapy goals. She was magic, too. She had a photographic memory for music, could hear a song once and hum it perfectly weeks later. She saw patterns in everything, in tile floors, in tree branches, in the way raindrops hit the window. She was brutally, refreshingly honest. When my hair looked bad, she told me. When she loved something, she loved it with her whole body, flapping her hands and bouncing on her toes in pure joy. Her laugh, when it came, was the most beautiful sound I'd ever heard. She taught me to see the world differently, to notice the things neurotypical people ignore, the hum of fluorescent lights, the texture of fabric, the way numbers can be beautiful. She was exhausting and extraordinary, and I loved her with a fierceness that sometimes scared me. By the time Emma turned 6, we'd found a rhythm. She was in a small school with an excellent special education program. She had a few kids she played near, if not exactly with. She was learning to read, devouring books about dinosaurs and space. But I was lonely. Parenting alone, especially a child with high needs, is isolating in ways people don't understand unless they've lived it. My family had mostly disappeared. My mother visited once, made uncomfortable comments about discipline in kids these days, and never came back. Friends from my old life drifted away when I couldn't do spontaneous brunches or girls' nights anymore. I spent my evenings researching therapies and my weekends driving Emma to social skills groups. And somewhere in there, I forgot I was still a person who needed community too. That's why I decided to try church. Not because I was particularly religious, though I'd grown up with a loose Christian background, but because I was desperate for connection. I wanted Emma to have community too, to see that there were places beyond school and therapy where she could belong. I researched carefully, looking for churches that advertised themselves as welcoming and inclusive. I found Grace Community Church online, saw photos of smiling, diverse families, read mission statements about loving your neighbor and embracing all of God's children. It seemed perfect. The building itself was charming, red brick with beautiful stained glass windows, surrounded by old oak trees. When we visited the first time on a warm September morning, people greeted us at the door with genuine smiles. The pastor shook Emma's hand gently when she offered it, not forcing eye contact, and I felt a flutter of hope. The first few weeks were okay. Emma tolerated the children's program, though she preferred to sit alone and color rather than participate in group activities. The teachers seemed patient enough. Adults were friendly in that surface-level way, asking how we were settling in, complimenting Emma's dress or hair. I started attending a women's Bible study on Wednesday mornings, grateful for adult conversation. But gradually, I noticed the shift. The smiles became tighter. The invitations to play dates that other moms extended to each other never came our way. When Emma had a meltdown during worship one Sunday, triggered by the sudden loud crash of cymbals during a hymn, I felt the weight of judgment in the stares that followed us as I carried her out. If you've ever been through something like this, leave the word strength in the comments. And if you believe every child deserves acceptance, please subscribe. There's more to this story, and it gets intense. The real problem started with the Sunday school situation. Emma's teacher, a woman named Carol with a tight bun and tighter smile, pulled me aside one morning. She suggested, ever so gently, that Emma might be more comfortable in the nursery with the toddlers. When I explained that Emma was intellectually on par with her age group, she just needed accommodations. Carol's smile didn't waver. "It's just that she doesn't participate like the others," she said. "She sits in the corner. She doesn't answer questions. The other children find her behavior distracting." I tried to explain stimming, tried to offer solutions, but I could see I was talking to a wall. Emma stayed in the regular class, but Carol's warmth evaporated entirely. Then there were the other parents. Jennifer was the ringleader, though I didn't realize it at first. She was the kind of woman who organized everything: the Christmas pageant, the church potlucks, the mission trips. She had 3 perfectly behaved children with perfectly combed hair and perfectly practiced manners. She was friendly to me initially, in a patronizing sort of way, lots of head tilts and sympathetic tones. But I overheard her once in the bathroom, not knowing I was in a stall, talking to another mom about how some parents just don't discipline properly, how children need structure and boundaries, how it's really not fair to other kids when one child dominates all the attention. I knew she was talking about Emma. I knew, and I said nothing. Just waited in that stall until they left, my face burning. The other children were even worse, because children are honest in their cruelty. They imitated Emma's hand flapping when she got excited. They laughed when she covered her ears during loud songs. They deliberately excluded her from games at the playground after church, running away when she approached, whispering and giggling. Emma noticed. She always noticed, even if she couldn't always articulate what she felt. She started asking me if she was bad. She started resisting going to church. But I pushed, thinking exposure would help, thinking surely a church community would eventually show compassion. I was so naive. I tried talking to the pastor, Pastor Mike, a balding man in his 50s who preached about love every Sunday. I made an appointment, sat in his office with its wooden cross and overflowing bookshelves, and explained autism to him. I gave him resources. I asked if we could make the children's program more inclusive, maybe train volunteers, maybe talk to the congregation about neurodiversity. He listened, nodded, made all the right sympathetic noises. Then he said he'd pray about it. He suggested I pray too, for patience, for guidance. He said sometimes God gives us challenges to strengthen our faith. He didn't say Emma was a challenge, not directly, but the implication hung in the air like smoke. I left feeling smaller than when I'd entered. The Sunday it all fell apart was in early November, cold and gray with that particular autumn dampness that seeps into your bones. Emma had actually been having a good week. She'd learned a new song on the little keyboard we'd bought her at a yard sale, plunking out melodies by ear. She was excited to go to church because they were doing a special children's message during the main service, and Emma loved being included in big kid things. She wore her favorite dress, pale yellow with sunflowers, and let me braid her hair without too much fussing. We arrived early, sat in our usual spot in the back row near the exit, just in case. The service started normally. Hymns, announcements, the passing of the offering plate. Then Pastor Mike called all the children to come to the front for the children's message. Emma looked at me with wide, hopeful eyes. She wanted to go. It was a big step for her, being in front of people, but she wanted to try. I nodded, squeezed her hand, and watched her walk up the aisle with the other kids. She sat slightly apart from the group, not quite integrated but present. Pastor Mike started talking about being unique, about how God made everyone special, and I felt a twist of irony that I pushed down. Emma was listening, rocking gently back and forth, a self-soothing motion she did when concentrating. That's when I heard it. The first giggle. A little boy next to Emma, maybe 9 years old, pointed at her rocking and whispered something to the girl next to him. She giggled too. Emma, sensing something but not understanding what, started rocking faster, a sign she was getting anxious. More whispers. More giggles. A few of the parents in the front rows noticed and frowned, but not at their children. At Emma. I stood up, ready to go get her. But before I could move, Emma started humming. It's something she does when she's overwhelmed, a low sound that helps her regulate. In the quiet church, it was audible. The giggles turned into outright laughter from several children. Pastor Mike tried to quiet them, but there was a moment of chaos, children talking over him, Emma's humming getting louder, her hands starting to flap. My heart was pounding as I started moving toward her. That's when I heard it. Jennifer's voice, meant to be a whisper to her friend but projected just loud enough. Some children simply don't belong in public places. It's embarrassing for everyone. The church went silent. Not the peaceful, reverent silence of prayer, but the awful, suffocating silence of collective shock and shame. Every head turned. Some looked at Jennifer with surprise, a few with approval, most with careful neutrality. Emma stopped humming. Her face, I'll never forget her face, went from confused to hurt in the span of a heartbeat. She understood enough. She knew. I walked up that aisle with my head high and my heart shattering. I took Emma's hand. We walked past Pastor Mike, who stood frozen, past Jennifer, who had the decency to look slightly uncomfortable, past all those watching faces. We walked out into the cold November morning. and Emma asked me the question I had no answer for. "Mommy, why don't they like me?" I tried to be quiet. I drove us home in silence because I didn't trust my voice. Emma stared out the window, picking at a loose thread on her dress. At home, I made her favorite lunch, macaroni and cheese with the shells cut into small pieces, and we ate without talking. That night, she had a nightmare. I heard her crying around midnight and found her sitting up in bed, asking me if she was bad, if she was wrong, if God didn't love her because she was different. I held her and told her lies I wished were true, that people were just scared of what they didn't understand, that she was perfect exactly as she was. But 7-year-olds who've been mocked in church don't believe their mothers when the world keeps telling them something different. The next 3 weeks were heavy. I kept Emma home from church, ignored the generic "we miss you" texts in the church group chat. Emma withdrew a little, asking fewer questions, smiling less often. She spent more time alone in her room, and I let her, knowing she needed space to process in her way. But I noticed something else, too. She was spending hours at her little keyboard. The cheap Yamaha we'd picked up for $30 because she'd shown interest in music. She'd always loved sounds, but this was different. She was creating. I'd hear her playing the same sequences over and over, adjusting notes, building something. When I asked what she was working on, she said she was making songs about feelings. "This one is sad," she'd say. "This one is confused. This one is still hopeful even though it's hurt." One evening, about 2 weeks after the church incident, I was washing dishes when I heard Emma playing something particularly beautiful. It stopped me mid-scrub, soap dripping from my hands. The melody was simple but haunting, childlike but emotionally complex. It sounded exactly like heartbreak feels. I dried my hands and went to her room. She was sitting on her small chair, feet barely touching the floor, completely absorbed. When she finished, she turned to me and said, "This is my song. About being different and people being mean, but me still being okay." I knelt down and asked her if she'd play it for me again. She did. And as I listened to my 7-year-old daughter translate her pain into something achingly beautiful, an idea started forming. I had a friend from college named Sarah who worked for a local nonprofit focused on autism awareness and acceptance. We'd reconnected on social media a few months earlier, and she'd mentioned they were planning a community event for November, Neurodiversity Celebration Day, she called it. A chance for autistic people and their families to share their experiences, for the community to learn. I messaged her that night. I told her about Emma, about what happened, about the music. I asked if Emma could perform one of her pieces at the event. Sarah called me within an hour. She was enthusiastic. Yes, absolutely. They'd love to have Emma. The event was in 3 weeks at the community center downtown. It would be small, maybe 70 or 80 people, families and educators mostly. Emma would have 5 minutes. Could she do that? I asked Emma the next morning. I explained the event, that it was a place where people understood autism, where being different was celebrated, not mocked. I told her she could play her song, the one about being different but okay, and that people would want to hear it. She thought about it for a long time, her serious little face working through the decision. Finally, she said, "Will mean people be there?" I told her no, only kind people who wanted to learn. She nodded. "Okay, I'll play my song. So they know kids like me aren't bad." Over the next 3 weeks, Emma practiced every day. Not obsessively, but focused. She polished her piece, memorized it completely, played it until her fingers moved with confidence. She also wrote out what she wanted to say, with my help. She wanted to introduce herself, explain autism in her words, and tell people why she made the song. We practiced that too, standing in front of her bedroom mirror, speaking clearly and slowly like her speech therapist taught her. I didn't realize until the week before that the community center was right next to Riverside Park, and that the church was having their annual Fall Family Festival in that same park on the same day. When Sarah mentioned it apologetically, worried about nosebleed. Something in me decided not to change anything. Maybe it was fate. Maybe it was my subconscious desire for something I wouldn't let myself consciously want. Either way, we kept the date. Here's where everything shifted. If you're still watching, I want to hear from you. Do you think children like Emma deserve spaces that celebrate them? Drop a comment and subscribe because what happens next proves that the quietest voices can be the most powerful. The morning of the event was crisp and bright, one of those perfect November days where the sun is warm but the air is cool. Emma wore her sunflower dress again, her choice. She wanted to reclaim it, she told me, which was a very sophisticated thought for a 7-year-old, but very Emma. We arrived at the community center early. The space was decorated with colorful banners about neurodiversity, acceptance, and celebration. There were tables set up with resources, a small stage at the front with a keyboard donated by a local music store, and folding chairs arranged in rows. People filtered in slowly, families with autistic kids of all ages, some adults who were autistic themselves, teachers, therapists. The energy was different than church, warmer, less performed, real. Emma was nervous. She held my hand tightly, chewing her bottom lip, eyes darting around the room, taking everything in. A few other kids were performing too, a teenager reading a poem, a young boy showing his art. Emma was scheduled in the middle of the program. Through the windows, I could see the church festival setting up in the park, bounce houses inflating, game booths being assembled, the smell of barbecue starting to drift through the air. I heard familiar gospel music playing through speakers, two worlds, side by side, not touching. Emma and I sat in the second row. She clutched a small index card with her introduction written on it, even though she'd memorized it. A security blanket in paper form. The event started with welcoming remarks from Sarah, talking about the importance of understanding and celebrating neurological differences. The teenager read her poem about feeling like an alien in a world that wasn't built for her. The young boy showed paintings that were explosions of color and emotion. Then Sarah called Emma's name. I squeezed her hand. She looked at me with those big brown eyes, and I saw fear there, but courage too. "You've got this," I whispered. "You're going to be amazing." She stood up, smoothed her dress, and walked to the stage. My heart was hammering so hard, I thought everyone could hear it. Emma sat at the keyboard, adjusted the bench, and took the microphone Sarah offered her. Her hands shook slightly. She looked at her index card, took a breath, and began to speak. Her voice was small but clear. "My name is Emma. I'm 7 years old. I have autism. That means my brain works differently than some people's brains. Some people think different means broken. But I'm not broken. I'm just me. Sometimes people are mean because they don't understand me. That makes me sad. But I'm still a person. I still have feelings. I made a song about that. It's called My Song because it's mine and it's about me." Then she set down the microphone and placed her hands on the keys. What came out was extraordinary. The piece started soft, almost hesitant, single notes that felt like questions. Then it built slowly, the melody becoming more complex, both hands moving independently, creating a conversation between bass and treble. There were moments that sounded sad, almost mournful. Then moments that lifted, that felt like hope pushing through darkness. Emma's whole body was engaged, swaying slightly, feeling the music. Her face was concentrated but peaceful, like she was finally speaking in her native language. The room was absolutely silent except for the piano. I saw people crying. I was crying. For 3.5 minutes, my daughter showed everyone in that room exactly who she was, and it was beautiful. What I didn't know was that the sound was carrying through the open windows. The park was close enough that the music drifted over. Later, Sarah told me what happened. People at the church festival started noticing the music. Curious, some walked over to the community center to see where it was coming from. They stood at the doors and windows, watching. And among them were Jennifer and Pastor Mike and several other families from Grace Community Church. They stood there watching my daughter, the child they'd mocked and excluded, playing her heart out in front of a room full of people who saw her value. When Emma finished, there was a moment of complete stillness. Then the applause started, loud and genuine. Emma looked startled, then pleased. She stood up and gave a small, awkward bow, the way I'd taught her. The audience stood, still clapping. Emma's smile was radiant. She looked at me and I nodded, giving her permission to come down. She walked off the stage and straight into my arms. I held her tight while people approached to congratulate her, to tell her how moved they were. Emma handled it well, accepting compliments with her characteristic directness. "Thank you. I worked hard on that." That's when I noticed them. Jennifer was standing near the entrance, her face pale. Pastor Mike was next to her, looking stricken. Behind them were several other church families, all frozen in place. For a moment, our eyes met. Jennifer's mouth opened like she was going to say something, but no sound came out. Pastor Mike took a step forward, his expression full of something that looked like remorse and realization. But I didn't want their apologies. I didn't want their newfound understanding that came only after my daughter proved her worth on their terms. I simply took Emma's hand and walked toward the side exit, the one that didn't require passing them. We walked right past them without acknowledging their presence at all, and the power in that moment, the choice to simply not engage, felt like the truest form of dignity. In the weeks that followed, my phone blew up. Messages from church members I barely knew, saying they'd heard about Emma's performance, saying they wished they'd understood better, saying vague things about doing better. Jennifer sent a long text that was half apology, half justification. Pastor Mike called twice and left voicemails about wanting to talk, about making the church more inclusive, about how moved he was by Emma's courage. I didn't respond to any of them. Not out of spite, but because I realized we didn't need their validation. Emma didn't need their approval to know her worth. She'd found it herself, in her music, in her honesty, in the community that celebrated her without requiring her to prove anything first. Emma was invited to play at 2 more events, one at her school and one at a local library's Autism Awareness Week. A music teacher who'd been at the community center reached out offering free piano lessons. Her specialty was working with neurodivergent students. Emma now goes every Tuesday and she's thriving. She's writing more music, building her skills, growing in confidence. She still has hard days. Autism doesn't go away because you play a pretty song. But she knows now that her difference isn't a deficit. She knows there are people and places in this world that will see her and celebrate her exactly as she is. As for me, I learned something too. I spent so much time trying to make space for Emma in places that didn't want her, believing that if we just tried hard enough, they'd see her value. But some spaces aren't meant for us, and that's okay. Better than okay, actually. Because leaving those spaces opens up room for the ones where we're not just tolerated, but treasured. Grace Community Church taught me what I didn't want for my daughter. The neurodiversity community taught me what I did. And Emma? Emma taught me that the quietest people often have the loudest truths to share if we'll just listen. Jennifer did eventually corner me at a grocery store about 2 months later. She wanted to apologize properly, she said. She admitted she'd been threatened by Emma, by the attention and accommodations she required, by her own fear of difference. She said watching Emma play changed something in her, helped her see her own biases. I appreciated the honesty. I really did. But I also told her gently that her growth wasn't my responsibility, and neither was her absolution. I wished her well and moved on. I heard through mutual acquaintances that the church did eventually implement some autism-friendly accommodations, sensory-friendly service hours, and trained volunteers. Good for them. We never went back. We found a different community, a smaller church that already had neurodivergent families, where Emma was welcomed from day one with no performance required. where she's just another kid, beautifully and ordinarily herself. So what do you think? Did my daughter prove something those people needed to see? Or should they have never needed proof in the first place? Let me know in the comments. And if this story moved you, if you believe every child deserves to be celebrated for who they are, please subscribe to this channel. There are more stories like this. Stories about standing up, about finding your people, about refusing to shrink yourself to fit into spaces too small for your truth. Thank you for listening to ours.